Hey everybody, I'm John Vento with the Needs Hotel Band here at the historic Carrie Furnace right outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we're so excited today to introduce you to my main man Ron, who knows this place better than anybody. And we got here before the band, so we're going to take a tour with Ron, tell you a little bit about this incredible facility, and then play some rock and roll. All right, we're back. I promised you that we've got this guy named Ron who knows more about this place than anybody.
No pressure at all.
No pressure.
All right.
You got a great reputation. First of all, tell us how old, when was this facility built? Who built it? Give us that background on this place.
The first blast furnace on this site is 1884. Okay. Brought in from Ohio by a couple of brothers, last name of Phones, who are far more famous for golf than they are for
Country
exactly.
Club. They were in the steel industry.
Yep. That's how they make their money.
Wow.
So the first blast furnace here is 1884. It's fairly successful. They built another one. By the 1890s, they're looking to get out of the business.
Okay.
And so in 1898, this site, which at that point is 2 blast furnaces, is sold to Carnegie Steel. Andrew Carnegie's interested in it because his homestead works are across the river, needs a direct iron source. Plus, he doesn't want anybody else to buy it. No competition is a big thing for him. Yeah. So he purchases this site for $750,000.
In what year?
In 1898. So that is $22 million in today's currency.
Wow, yeah.
Phones brothers take that money, invest in Oakmont, become world famous for golf.
And they build a country club.
Exactly. And then this place really takes off after Carnegie Steel purchases it. And they greatly expanded. At its height, there's 7 blast furnaces here. Yeah. And this site was supplying the iron that became the steel across the river in Homestead that literally and figuratively built America's 20th century. Yeah. The Empire State Building, Panama Canal locks.
That all came out of this.
Exactly.
The iron, Mon Valley, as we call it. Right.
So what's still here are furnaces number 6 and 7. We're actually standing right below furnace 7 here. Right. These opened in 1907, and they operate until 1978. And at the time that they opened, this was the apex of the industry. So, there's this big, push these days to redefine Pittsburgh as a high-tech corridor. Yeah. I'm here to argue with you that it always has been.
Right.
Okay. And what you're seeing here was the high-tech of its day.
Wow.
This is Google, this is Apple, this is all of those things put in one place. Yeah. And what happens on this site sets the standard for iron and steel making throughout the 20th century and how they're still doing it today.
Wow, that's fantastic. Why don't we go inside?
Absolutely.
Thanks, buddy. So Ron, we're right now in front of this very cool wall and this incredible piece of art that's above us. And this is the true definition of guerrilla art. This is world famous, right? I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Tell us how this came about and the whole story behind this.
So, in the early to mid 90s, you have a changing world here in Pittsburgh. You have a number of these plants that are closed down all up and down the rivers, and people are coming and exploring them and discovering them. There's a group of art students that have come to the region to go to school who are just fascinated by these places and start creating these transient pieces of work throughout, the Armstrong Cork Factory, hanging pieces off the Fort Wayne Railroad Bridge, etc. So it's very much this guerrilla style art in the moment of the moment, creating art for that moment, period. They found this place. And in 1994, they came in and created this huge owl that spanned the width of the building that's behind us. Problem was they told their friends who told more friends and told more people after that, and this starts becoming a party site. Wow. Word starts to spread throughout the communities. There's something happening at the Carrie Furnaces. It involves young people, and there's idols being built.
And the site at this time is abandoned, right?
It is. It's owned by a scrapper.
So you weren't here?
We weren't here. We were fighting to save it. So this end of the site is kind of just being left to its own devices. Okay. And it really becomes the Wild West in a lot of ways. People are in and out of here. There are graffiti artists coming in. There's people coming in to explore. There's people coming in doing things they shouldn't be doing, stealing anything that wasn't nailed down. But it's, let's call it an attractive nuisance.
Okay.
You look around. It's like being stuck in the middle of an M.C. Escher drawing.
Sure.
And so it moves from being a place of work to an aesthetic. And so folks like these were drawn to the aesthetic of the site and just the beauty of it and the power of it. So they create this owl, they tell all their friends, parties start happening, word starts spreading through the communities. There's something happening down here involving kids, involving idols. It's got to be satanic, right? So I mean, there's news reports and the whole deal.
Right.
And one Sunday, there's a party going on here. Police come down, raid the party. Everybody takes off running. Unfortunately, they shoot a guy. The police shoot one of the partygoers.
Ooh.
Not fatally,
Okay.
but nonetheless shoot.
Right.
The owners of the site at the time say, "Oh my God, we better pay attention."
Right.
Came in, tore down the owl, cut all the steps off all around the site, and kind of controlled the perimeter for a while. But these guys couldn't stay out. This was like the siren in the valley,
Right.
beckoning them to come play, come explore. So they decided that they were going to come back and do something a little bigger, a little more bold, and a whole lot harder to tear down. But even more importantly, they weren't going to tell anyone. So it's this core group of 7 artists whose faces are on the milk carton here, who decided they were going to come in and create this piece, not knowing whether it would be there a month from now, 2 months from now, or a year from now. It's of the moment, but it's to make a statement of the changing times within this region. And how places like this can move from being a place of work to being an aesthetic. So they built this deer, and the reason they chose a deer is in mythology, deer are symbols of rebirth. And they were watching this site be reborn and nature reclaiming it. You would come down and there would be deer everywhere.
Wow.
So they thought this is a perfect symbol.
Fantastic.
So they built it entirely out of materials found on site, using no tools from the outside other than pliers and lineman shears. And it took them literally a year of Sundays to build.
And they had to break in, right? I mean,
Yep. Oh yeah.
They were here illegally.
Trespassing. Exactly.
They were trespassing, right?
Exactly. So there are rules of engagement where you're not going to tell anybody else.
Right.
You can bring your lunch in. You can bring those couple of tools. You weren't allowed to take anything out with you.
Right. Wow.
And so starting in 1997, going all the way through November of 1998, they built this in place.
Right.
Nobody ever bothered it.
Right.
So what starts as this piece of guerrilla art, which is really a statement on the changing, culture of this region, has now become arguably the most popular piece of public art around.
Wow.
We've had people come from all over the world just to see this.
So how did they say, "Oh, look what we did"?
They
At what
didn't
point
really.
did-
They were
just
really
was
quiet
very
about
organic.
it. Right. So
Okay.
I started working here in 1998. Now I knew this was here,
Right.
but the park corporation, the people that owned the site, had no idea.
Wow.
No idea. So I came in here in 1999 with a person from the park corporation and a gentleman named Mike Bennett, who's a historian, and he and I were working on a National Historic Landmark nomination. And we couldn't get in without having somebody from the park with us.
Right.
And I was so worried that they would lose their mind over this piece,
Yeah.
that we avoided it at all costs. I mean,
Right.
we went every which way you could, but eventually we had to come in this way.
Right.
So we came in, underneath the hoist house, and I'm doing my best to get him to focus on the dust catchers and the gas washing system, like look at all this, and he stops, and he says, "What the is this?" And I go right into my best, Porky Pig imitation, trying to explain it away. And he's like, "This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I'm going to make sure we save it."
Wow.
He said, "When you guys get the site, you're going to save it." And I said, "Yeah. I mean, it's showing what these sites can be."
Yeah.
So really, what it comes down to is this: it's an amazing piece of artwork. It's a statement of the time, but even more so, it showed us as an organization, Rivers of Steel, and it showed people in this region and beyond, really, what the arts can do to help move forward the narrative.
And this beautiful tribute to the artists.
Exactly.
And you mentioned that Tim was the guy that kept pushing it and pushing it forward.
Yeah, Tim Collin is still a very active artist in this region. He's done a number of public art pieces. The Steel Workers by the Birmingham Bridge.
Sure, yeah.
There's a heron inside the Children's Museum. There's some topiaries at Mellon Park. Those are all his work.
Yep.
But he gained that experience by doing pieces like this.
Right here.
And understanding that the culture of this region and the work of this region and the engineering and ingenuity that took place here is all meaningful and can be expressed in different ways. So we use that as really a jumping off point.
Yeah.
for us as an organization and how we were going to build this site, and that the arts would be a large part of that.
Yep.
And that, you know, the way that we discuss this generally is there's a number of different doors you can walk in to enter a site like this. Not everybody is going to be interested in that industrial story, or at least they don't think they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? But if they come because they're interested in the arts, invariably they're going to want to know more about this.
Yeah.
And it helps really move this whole narrative forward, brings new communities and new people into that discussion, and allows us to broaden our audience and really broaden the reach
There's
of
no
the
question.
history of this
And the
region.
tribute
Yep.
and the bio and some of the work of the 7 artists is phenomenal.
Right.
So you ready to take me inside? I've never
Absolutely.
ever been to a steel mill,
Ah.
even though I have generations in our
Right.
family that worked in a steel mill. And I would guess that today that most of us probably have never been to a steel
Nope.
mill.
No,
So
not at all.
want to head inside?
Absolutely.
Let's go. Walk-in shot with Ron as we enter the heart of the matter. We cool? Yep. Okay, so let's go. So we're working our way inside of this thing. Where are we now? What part?
So this is a stove deck.
Stove deck.
So what
Okay.
happens here, you know, these vessels next to us, which and they're really just giant pressure vessels, are the hot stoves.
Okay.
Think of them as the lungs of the blast furnace. This is where air is superheated up to 1800 degrees. And that's what's causing the blast in the blast furnace.
So Ron, we're now inside this incredible structure. And earlier off camera, we were discussing the construction of the Empire State Building. And I mentioned to you, I took my daughter and a bunch of her friends just last year, and we did the tour. And the one thing that just jumped out at me was the statement on the display that said, when the steel came from Pittsburgh, it was still warm when it entered the construction site. Tell us about that process and how this Carrie Furnace contributed to that incredible building.
Well, the iron that was being produced here was then being shipped across the river to Homestead,
Okay.
being converted into steel. That steel was then being rolled on the 48-inch universal plate mill, which we have here.
Okay.
We saved it in 1990 and moved it all around a bunch of times, and now it's inside the building. But it was all the plate that went into the Empire State Building was rolled on that, shipped out still warm. New Jersey, shipped across. They didn't waste any time. These guys,
no computers.
no computers, doing everything with slide rules
Right.
and timetables and just
No cell phones, right?
Exactly. You know, the beauty of the way that Carnegie ran business, which U.S. Steel then picks it up, is that efficiency is what matters.
Right.
You know, so you want to build upon that efficiency.
Precision efficiency.
Exactly. A lot of in-house training all your engineers in the Carnegie way, which is why, you know, Carnegie Mellon University exists.
Okay. Right. Right.
All of that because it was down to an art. It's as simple as that. And that really is lost in a lot of ways because we're so reliant upon technology now. But at that point, it's really reliant upon knowledge, ingenuity, and teamwork.
Yeah. And this was 1929, right? Or,
Well, it's into the 30s. It's by
the Empire State Building
Yeah,
was it in
it's 36, I think. It's when they
okay,
finished
36.
It.
But it just is so amazing to me, and I think it would be amazing to anybody when you think of that time. And as you said, the lack of communications and cell phones and email, and none of that existed. But the steel left Pittsburgh and was warm when it got to New York City.
Well, and it's one of the things that that is part of that Pittsburgh spirit and that Pittsburgh fabric of, you know, the railroads and how they ran was all based out of what was happening in Pittsburgh.
Wow.
You know, the shipping, all based out of what was happening here. It was really setting the standard for the world. You know, we kid a lot, but only partially kidding, that if it didn't happen here first, it didn't happen.
Wow.
You know, it's just Pittsburgh really was setting the trend for how the world would operate. And it's something that became commonplace across the world.
And don't you think that our ethnicity and the workers and the labor force, because even to this day, people will say there's nothing like the Pittsburgh region and the work ethic that exists in this community.
Right.
Would it be safe to say that was even truer?
Oh,
back
absolutely,
then?
absolutely. And it's that push to be the best and do the best. And really what it's all stemming from is trying to achieve a piece of the American dream. Now, it isn't It isn't all sunshine and roses.
And it's not always pretty. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Yeah.
But that's what that common bond was,
Yeah.
is that everybody was working hard so that they can succeed, provide for their families, and hope that their kids wouldn't have to do the same.
And after, because this is a rough life.
Oh yeah, it's
This
really
is
rough.
hard work and dangerous work.
Yep, it still is to this day.
Still is.
You know,
'Cause we have,
in
right up the
2020, if
street.
you go up, a mile away from here,
Yeah,
this is not for the faint of heart.
yeah,
Places like this will chew you up and spit you out.
gotcha.
And you've got to be a very strong individual to be able to do it. And you're taming nature. You're working in a man-made volcano
Yeah.
and trying to control that
Yeah.
and manipulate it. And we found success here doing that. And it comes from the financial end, but it also comes from the labor end.
Yep.
So as much as the technology and investment and all of that, which built this region, Pittsburgh had more capital in it than anywhere other than New York and London.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the 20th century. But it's also the birthplace of unions.
Yep. And we're gonna touch base on that because we are just across the river from the Homestead Works, where a horrible tragedy occurred. And wasn't it an anniversary on the Homestead?
July 6th, yeah.
Right. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. All right, let's head out.
Okay.
So Ron, now we're in absolutely the belly of the beast. And what is this area called?
So this is the cast house. We are at the base of the blast furnace, number 6 furnace. That, as I mentioned before, this is a man-made volcano where you are
That's a great way to put it.
loading iron ore rocks, hematite rocks, iron ore, limestone, and a product called coke, which is coal that's baked, essentially a pure form of carbon. That's the fuel. You're loading that into the top. It's falling down into the furnace. It's met with a blast of hot air that comes from the hot stoves through this big pipe called a bustle pipe. It comes in at about 1800 degrees, pushing in, hits the coke. Coke starts to burn. Coke's doing two things. It's raising the temperature inside of that furnace to close to 3,000 degrees, but it's also giving off carbon. And carbon's displacing the oxygen in the iron ore, because iron ore in its raw form is essentially iron and oxygen and some junk.
Right.
It's displacing the oxygen in the iron ore. Then the limestone's job is as the flux to allow for a smooth flow of iron, but also to bond with the impurities. All of this is happening in midair. That smelting process is happening in midair. It's raining out iron. The iron pools at the base of the furnace. The impurities, slag, and anybody who's from Pittsburgh knows slag.
We know slag.
It's
slag.
everywhere. It's everywhere. Most of our houses are built on it and everything else.
Yeah.
That slag settles on top, and every 4 to 6 hours, the men who worked here, and it was primarily men for the majority of the history of this site, they're charged with opening this furnace and drying off the slag and the iron would come down these runners.
Liquid, all liquid.
Liquid iron
Like
coming
soup.
out, coming out at roughly 2,800 degrees. Down open runners through the floor, on the floor,
Sure.
through a hole in the floor and into an awaiting vessel known as a bottle car or torpedo car.
Which we're going to see one of those here
Exactly.
shortly.
So giant thermos on wheels, where the iron would remain in a molten state as it's taken across the hot metal bridge over to Homestead and converted into
Hence
steel.
the hot metal bridge.
Exactly. Now there's
That's why
a little fun fact, 7 hot metal bridges in the world.
Right.
4 of them were between McKeesport and the south side of Pittsburgh. Because ideally, you don't want to have to transport.
So the
your
hot metal
iron.
bridge that we know today in Pittsburgh, is that the bridge that was used, or was there another?
No, there was another one. There's
that's
one
further
right behind
down.
us. Exactly.
Right.
That hot metal bridge
Okay.
is for the Jones and Laughlin.
Right, for
works.
J&L. Right, okay.
And the one you drive on was actually the commodity side. The bicycle side was
Yes.
the hot metal side. So, and then there's a bridge behind us, which is Rankin Hot Metal Bridge number 35.
Wow.
Built in 1900 by Carnegie Steel and Keystone Bridge Company.
Okay.
Which was built specifically to move molten iron from here across the river over to Homestead.
Now, why across the river? Is it because they just didn't have the space over there? Why not put this thing next to?
Ideally, you would, because
okay,
what you don't
right.
want to do is
Right.
take 2,800 degree iron across a body of water.
Right.
You can put all the water you want onto molten metal.
Right.
Doesn't matter, iron, steel, aluminum, whatever. But if you put the metal on water, it's going to be a problem.
Right.
Because what's going to happen is steam's going to form, concussive explosion.
Sure.
So if you take 150 tons of molten iron and just dump it into the river, it's going to take everything out.
Wow. Gotcha.
So that bridge is the most over-engineered bridge in the
Right.
world, and we live in a region that has some bridge problems, okay?
Yep, yep.
That thing's not going anywhere. But it's built to handle not just the weight of these cars, but also to prevent against spills.
Sure.
So there's steel plating on the deck and 6 feet up the sides, and all of that was covered in a refractory, so a high silica sand
Right.
brick to protect against spills. There's also a grade change. So if there was a problem, they can cut a car loose and it would come back. So why do that? Why, you know, it makes sense. Why would they build everything in Homestead?
Right.
They were constrained by topography.
Sure.
They didn't have that room to build.
Right.
This plant existed previously, so they purchased them and tied them together.
Right.
You know, Jones and Laughlin Pittsburgh was a very similar thing. Two different companies joined together.
And they had to cross the river.
Exactly.
And it went from here, across the river, to the Homestead Works.
So the Homestead Works.
And that's where the finished product was produced.
That's where it was converted into steel. So the big difference between iron and steel, the biggest difference, is carbon content. Iron is a wonderful product, but it's too high in carbon. It becomes brittle. So you can make rail out of iron, but you're going to be replacing that rail every 6 to 8 weeks. But if you make it out of steel, you can go years.
Right.
So you reduce the carbon levels of the iron to make steel. And it becomes this material that can be shaped any way you want.
Right.
You know, it's thick or it's thin and maintains its tensile strength. So then you can build an Empire State Building.
That is still
Exactly.
credible to this
So
day.
that's the biggest difference, is a reduction. So here, this is a carbon reduction process to make iron. Across the river, they use what's known as an oxidation reduction process. You're introducing oxygen to blow out carbon.
Right. And that's where the finished product
Exactly.
is. Gotcha. And you mentioned that, I call it a train, but the thermos
Yep.
on wheels.
Yep.
Let's go down and check that out.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
So Ron, last segment you were talking about this molten lava, right? That comes down through a hole and it goes into this thing right here,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
So what is this?
So this is a bottle car. This is a
Bottle car.
You know, or torpedo car,
Okay.
or submarine car. There's a bunch of different names for it, but really what it is a giant thermos on wheels. So it's a 1.5 inch thick steel vessel lined with about 3 feet of refractory brick. And what it's going to do is act as a thermos. This is in a discharge position right now, but normally this would be rotated up. The opening would be right below that spout. Iron comes out, fills it up. This holds 150 tons worth of molten iron. When it's full, the third helper would be up there spotting it. It gives the high sign,
Yeah.
because you can't hear each other if you try to yell. It's so
And how
noisy.
often in a day is this thing filled up?
This thing's filled up 4 times a day.
4 times a day,
Yeah,
in an
4
8-hour
times.
shift.
In an 8-hour shift. It may not be this exact same
I understand.
because they may have to
But
hold it.
basically, they're pumping 4 of these things out
Exactly.
in an 8-hour shift. And are
Exactly.
they working around the clock?
Oh, yeah.
They're 24
They
hours.
ran these places, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year in what are known as campaigns. And those campaigns would generally run up to 10 to 12 years before they would have to take this furnace offline, bring the heat down,
Right.
take all the brick out of the inside, and then go back in and re-brick it.
Wow.
So they tried not to do that all that often because it's
Sure.
time consuming and expensive.
Yeah.
But they would run those campaigns. It's all part of how Carnegie really worked his
Good.
system.
I'm glad you. Okay. So let's go there.
Okay.
Because I asked you earlier about, Carnegie was a railroad guy, right? With
Yep.
the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Yep.
How does he transition from a railroad guy, moderately successful young dude, into really the creator of the steel industry? Is that an accurate statement?
The creator of the modern steel
Of the
industry.
modern steel industry, right.
Absolutely.
So how does that occur?
His genius is organization. His genius is business. If Carnegie was standing here right now, I don't know that he could tell you all the ins and outs of the technology of this.
Okay.
But what he knew how to do more than anything else is recognize trends and hire the best people. So when he was in the railroad business, he was very much the efficiency guy. And he won the favor of Tom Scott, who was the vice president of Pennsylvania Railroad. And Tom Scott encouraged him to invest in other industries, diversify his money,
Sure.
make as much as he could. He starts investing in the iron business. Well, why the iron business? Because they're supplying the rail for the railroads.
Right.
So you're getting money both ends
Sure.
there. Okay. As he's investing more and more into the iron industry, he's seeing more return on the profits as it's growing. Civil War hits. This region becomes the arsenal of democracy for the first time. And this great production of iron, Carnegie watches his profits go up and up and up. So he moves away from railroads and into iron. And while he's doing that, he's recognizing these trends and he's saying, you know, we need to build better, we need to be more efficient of how we do this, we need to keep more things in-house. There's too much money going out to other companies. The more that we can do in-house, the more money we can make. We can then take that money, reinvest it back into our business. So that's how he was running things in the iron business. But then he sees a vessel known as the Bessemer converter. There's one down at Station Square. Okay.
Right, the
He
Bessemer
sees that in
converter.
action during one of his visits to England. And that is that first, you know, real successful attempt to make steel in by the ton,
Right, on a much larger scale.
in a cheap and efficient manner.
Right.
They've been making steel for centuries, but it was a very laborious hand process. So steel was, you know, one of the most valuable metals. You know, only used for specialty pieces, for knives
Right.
and for swords and things like that. But the idea that you can apply it to, you know, the greater landscape is there.
Right.
So once he sees that, he says, this is it. This is the future. Comes back to Pittsburgh and starts to divest himself of the iron business and invests in some property in Little Braddock's Field, just to the east of us here, and builds the Edgar Thomson Works.
Was that the first plant?
That is his
Edgar Thomson?
very first fully integrated
Wow,
steel
okay.
plant. And it's also the only one left in the state of Pennsylvania now.
That is just amazing. That it was
amazing.
the first and it's still functioning.
Right. Yeah, they have two working blast furnaces there, which are the only two working blast furnaces left in the state of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
At its height, Pittsburgh had 75 blast furnaces. You know, the time I was born, there were still 45.
I remember we would, and we're similar age, and I was living in Penn Hills, and we would drive downtown, and as soon as we went through the Squirrel Hill Tunnel, it could be a bright sunny day, but it was orange and black and green.
Exactly.
And you couldn't even see the car in front of you from the...
It was all sensory. It
was
everywhere.
horrible.
I mean, I grew up right over the hill from
Sure.
that. And
So
it's
you
just-
saw it all.
Saw it all. Yeah, but so Carnegie's genius is this ability to recognize trends, recruit the best of the best. He builds ET. He recruits Captain William Jones from Cambria Iron, who then comes in and puts in this system of hard driving, meaning you work the machinery and in turn the people as hard as you could, as long as you could, and then you replace it. You work it until it wears out. And that's how you're going to be most efficient. And along with that, so you need to distribute your iron and steel. How do you do this? Well, via railroads. Well, you own the railroads.
Right.
To bring the iron ore in from the Great Lakes, you have to ship it across the Great Lakes. Why pay somebody else freight? You own the freighters.
Right.
You know, you invest in limestone mines, you invest in the iron ore fields, and more importantly in this region, you start investing in the coke fields.
Which is where
Henry Clay Frick comes in. Exactly.
Henry Clay Frick, yeah.
So Henry Clay Frick is from, you know, Westmoreland, Fayette County area, West Overton. And his goal when he's a kid is to be a millionaire by the time he's 25. He comes from a family of distillers. Old Overholt is his family. But he starts investing in coal mines, which in turn he starts coking.
Right.
That coke is then being sold to Carnegie. Carnegie starts buying shares of the company. Eventually, by the late 1880s, he owns more shares in Frick's company than Frick does. Causes a little tension.
Sure.
but it's because he's bringing it all in-house.
Right.
Eventually, it becomes part of Carnegie Steel. He then brings Henry Clay Frick in as president of Carnegie Steel in 1889, which sets the stage for what happens in the next
And we're going
decade.
to talk about that
Exactly.
in a minute. Yep.
But it's all part of what becomes known as vertical integration. The more you can bring in-house, the more you can control not just the product, but you're controlling the flow of the money. You know, it is maximizing your profits and efficiency.
And it all
That's the
started
Carnegie
for
genius.
Carnegie over in Europe with the Bessemer.
Yep.
That was the thing that triggered the whole thing.
That he realized that that was the future.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're going to talk about Henry Clay Frick as we peek over the river.
Yep.
So
Okay.
let's head on
All right,
over.
cool.
So Ron, we are now up, we're elevated, and as we look that way, there's the river. Can't really see it because of all the trees. But across that river occurred one of the most historic labor strikes, events of the modern labor movement.
Right.
And what year was the...
1892, so July 6, 1892 is the Great Battle of Homestead. So we
Right.
just celebrated the 128th anniversary.
Right.
Took place, the battle itself took place at the pump house, which is one of our properties, which is directly across the river that
Right.
way, which was just a pumping station for the Homestead Works. But it's now sacred ground for labor historians and
Sure.
union activists worldwide. It's because it's there that the union, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, took a stand against Carnegie Steel.
Right.
And really what it comes down to is a story about control. Who controls your destiny? Is it capital?
Yep.
Or does labor control
And
their
there
own
was
destiny?
safety.
Exactly.
There was wages and so on, but
Right.
safety was a big, big issue,
Well,
right?
absolutely. And wages were an issue, but it wasn't, the sense that most people have that, they're striking, it's all about
for
money.
more money, right.
But really it was about hiring practices. It was about how to create a safe environment. It was having a say in what your workplace was going to be. The idea was this, and the reason that it happens in Homestead and it doesn't happen in Braddock, it doesn't happen in the city, it doesn't happen in Newcastle, wherever, is that Homestead was a very different town. Homestead was a town that was not a company town, but a workers' town. It was considered a workers' republic. It was run by the workers.
Right.
And it was really what they felt was the embodiment of the American dream, that American spirit, egalitarianism, okay?
Yep.
Having a say in your destiny. And that's really what the fight was about, was being able to control or have a say in how your future is going to look and how your workplace is going to look. It wasn't so much an argument that, oh my gosh, they want to cut our wages. It's more an argument of what happens to my neighbor and my neighbor's neighbor and our kids. Where does this go?
And it all came to a head on
It
July
all comes
the
to a
6th.
head in July 6, 1892. The short version is this. The Amalgamated had a 3-year contract with Carnegie Steel. That was the last of Carnegie's mills that had a union in it. Andrew Carnegie was determined to break that union. He brought in Henry Clay Frick in 1889 to be president of Carnegie Steel. Frick had a reputation of being virulently anti-union. He was more than happy to bust heads in the coal fields. Because his thought was this: my capital, my property, my investment, my decision.
Right.
Period.
Yep.
Period. So Carnegie brings him in because he needs that side.
Yeah, 'cause he
Carnegie
wasn't-
wanted the results, but he didn't want to be the bad guy.
Right, right.
Okay. So Frick is brought in under that mantle. He breaks the strike very quickly in Duquesne, and next they focus on Homestead. The 3-year contract is up the end of June 1892. Starting early 1892, negotiations open to extend the contract. Carnegie Steel puts out terms that are never going to be acceptable to the union. The union puts out terms that obviously Carnegie Steel is never going to accept. It becomes very obvious that this is where it's going to go. It's going to lead to a strike. So in preparation, Frick does a couple of things. First thing he does is he ensures that Andrew Carnegie's out of the country. Because Carnegie had a bad habit of hurting his own causes by speaking out.
Right, making public statements.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would seemingly be in support of the workers. So they didn't want to weaken that stance. They sent him away. He then builds a big fence around the mill, 12-foot high fence, dubbed Fort Frick,
Okay.
to seal off the mill so that they can start bringing in scab workers, known as black sheep
Right,
at the
because
time.
they went on strike, so
Exactly.
they're bringing in scab
So
workers.
start doing that. The Amalgamated, which was the union of the day. Now it's very different than what we know as unions. It's not all of the rank and file. It was just the skilled workers, so 10% of the workforce. But what was good for the goose is good for the gander. If the skilled workers were able to control things, then there's that trickle down, which is a positive
Yep.
effect on everyone. So the Amalgamated starts to prepare for a strike as well. They set up headquarters in what was then known as Boast's new building. It's our headquarters, the Boast building. Tallest building in town, so they can look down into the mill site. Contract ends June 30th. Carnegie Steel locks the workers out. Workers say, you can't lock us out, we're on strike.
Right.
Okay. Frick then makes arrangements with the Pinkerton Agency, which had a larger standing army than the U.S. Army at that time.
A lot of people didn't know that.
Exactly.
Yes.
And they were notorious for busting unions.
Yep.
Hired hands come in, bust the unions. He made arrangements with them to bring 300 men in by river into the Homestead Works in the early morning hours of July 6th. Why by river? Because if they came by land, they would be stopped.
Yep.
The thought was bring them by river, they go right onto Carnegie Steel property. If anybody tries to stop them, that's trespassing, they're breaking the law. And then you can have, you can
And you shoot 'em.
prosecute. Exactly.
Prosecute in many ways.
Exactly. Word gets out that the Pinkertons are coming, and they are met at that dock by thousands of exceedingly angry steel workers and their families. And they're told, turn around, go home. Don't get off the boat. This goes back and forth for a number of hours. Eventually, tempers flare, shots are fired, and by the end of the day, there are 10 people dead.
10.
7 workers, 2 Pinkertons.
Wow.
Now, the Pinkertons had been stranded there because they were taking their injured away with the tugboat, so it's just 2 barges sitting there. Eventually, they surrender because they were going to lose. They surrender, they're brought off the barges, walked up through the mill site through what's known as a bloody gauntlet. Steel workers and their families lining either side, and a parade of Pinkertons coming through, and they're just
Pummeled.
being pummeled, exactly.
Yeah.
They're shipped out of town. The workers feel like, we won. We won. However, within 6 days, 8,000 state militia come marching into town, place the town ostensibly under martial law,
Wow.
which it stays through November of that year. Once the militia is in town, Carnegie Steel can then start bringing in scab workers. They blacklisted everybody who went on strike, brought in scab workers, slowly started opening up the mills. By November, the strike's over because the strikers and their families couldn't
They can't
hold out.
survive.
They ran out of money.
Wow.
You know, your gardens are drying up.
Sure.
You have to feed your family. So in the end, the union capitulates, and they're allowed to come back to work as long as they agree to Carnegie's outlined, outcomes there, with being, 12-hour workday, working on what's known as a sliding scale, meaning, previously they'd been paid by tonnage. The more you produce, the more you're paid. Carnegie Steel proposed this sliding scale, meaning your pay is based upon the price of steel.
Wow.
If the price of steel is up, your wages go up. If the price of steel falls, your
Wow.
wages are less.
What a deal.
Well, yeah.
I'd love to do that as a business owner.
Especially since Carnegie manipulated the market.
Absolutely. Right.
So he's going to keep wages low.
Sure.
So those are the first 2 pieces, and the third one is the most important. You must disavow all notions of unionism.
Wow.
So a lot of people had to agree to that if they wanted their jobs. 300 men were blacklisted for life, could
So
not
they were
work in
never
this
permitted to
industry
come back.
anywhere. But that kills the union in the steel industry for 40 years.
Wow.
That was labor's last great stand. And you don't have unions within this industry until the Wagner Act is passed in 1935, which is, a federally mandated act that's telling employers that your employees have a right to collectively bargain.
Right.
You can't just start breaking heads.
So
if
the
they're talking.
impact of the Homestead strike and the violence that occurred there lasted over 40 years.
Well, really lasted longer than that. But yeah, the lack of union is 40 years.
Right.
But the industry never got over it, and that town never got over it. There was never, again, trust between the workers and management. Whereas at one point, there was a pretty good partnership.
Sure.
And that legacy rests squarely, really, on Frick and Carnegie.
So Carnegie kind of just turned above, but he knew what was happening.
He knew what was
All
happening.
indications are he knew exactly what
He
was
knew,
happening.
you know, there are letters from Carnegie, telegrams and letters from Carnegie telling Frick, let grass grow over the mill. What he didn't want to have happen, and in fairness, is, you know, people dying was not what he had planned.
Right.
And, you know, he based these actions on what they did in other plants. Show of force,
Everybody
the
would
union
back
backs
down, right,
off.
so he never
He
dreamed.
figured that would happen here. He just miscalculated. He didn't
Yep.
understand, you know, how dedicated these people were. And, you know, Frick, on the other hand, didn't really care.
Yeah.
But so the unions are gone in this mill and, you know, within this industry for 40 years. So that pendulum, which should sit in the middle and everybody have an equal
Yep.
share, swings totally to the side of capital, to where the workers become chattel. The workers become yet
Sure.
another, you know, commodity.
Yep.
Another raw material. I mean, we're standing here at the car dumper,
Yeah.
which is where iron ore was brought in.
And they're considered
They're
disposable.
no different.
I had years ago, I had a small business partner, and he once sat me down. He said the difference between him and me was that I didn't understand that people were disposable. And at that moment, I realized that was a partnership that wasn't going to work.
Right.
And it was just because I feel the exact opposite. The people are the foundation for every successful business.
Which is why
Everything in life, and
You
not
know,
just business.
Which is why you never hear bad things about George Westinghouse.
Right. Well,
Because
I wish we had the time, because
Right,
that's one of my
exactly.
heroes.
Right.
And George Westinghouse has left such an impact on our region,
Mm-hmm.
and was so gracious and supportive of his employees. It was just.
And that's the
maybe we'll do it
difference.
again,
There
and
we
we'll
go,
talk about
absolutely.
George Westinghouse. What do you think?
Anytime.
Thank you, my brother.
My pleasure.
We appreciate your cooperation, you and your team, and this has been such an amazing visit.
It's our pleasure, and we
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to highlight what we do.
Yeah, and thanks for putting up with our music.
Yeah, anytime.
All right, talk to you soon.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.